Hey, welcome back to Trek on the Tube, and welcome back to the second ever interview segment on this channel, the second ever interview video. I'm sorry for the rough the rough intro here. I'm just slapping this together. It's the interview that counts. Yeah, so today I'm talking to Aaron Waltke, someone that's working on Prodigy at the moment. We had a great chat, we had a good time. Do enjoy. Hey, welcome back to not Trek Chat, but a bit of an interview segment. This is the second interview segment on Trek on the Tube. I am joined here today by the wonderful Aaron J. Waltke, and I won't try the German pronunciation. He's fiddling with his camera here, but it's all good. We are going to talk a bit about Prodigy, a bit about, I think, other projects that he's worked on. Aaron is currently head writer, co-executive producer on Star Trek Prodigy. He's been working on season 1. He'll be working on season 2. We wish him to work on the, I guess, like endless seasons that continue on. The 27 seasons that the show is going to get, right?
Here's hoping.
I do want to get into some more, I guess, important stuff as well later on. We can maybe talk a bit about equal pay for people working in animation and people working in live action, in terms of writing. Yeah. So let's jump right in. First of all,
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of talk about Tales of Arcadia. I have never seen this, but I think that the name Guillermo del Toro, which pops up everywhere on that show, is kind of the reason why I've been intrigued about it for so many years. So maybe you can kind of get me hooked onto this. Like, what is this? This is multiple shows that take place within the same universe. Is that it?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I first was brought on to Tales of Arcadia right back in its inception. It's a project, as you said, that was created by Guillermo del Toro. Who it was amazing to be able to call him sort of a colleague on the show. So originally it was, I mean, I can get into the whole history of the project, but it's a project that Guillermo had for a very long time in his mind. And when he did that tour with all of his art books and stuff and stuff, in one of his notebooks, you see just like a little the origins of it in one of his notebooks. It says like, but it says like Kelsey Grammer as a troll, and
Okay.
and you can see that in the notebook. But yeah, it was originally, I think he originally tried to pitch it as a live action series, but this was like maybe 20 years ago, and everybody came to him and they were like, "Are you kidding? 3 of your characters are CGI monsters?
Yeah.
Like this is going to cost $1 billion." Of course, that was before the days of Game of Thrones, where literally you have 3 dragons as main
Yeah,
characters.
that's fine.
Uh,
Now it's okay.
yeah, now it's okay, but back then they were like it was madness. So then he wrote it as a book with a horror writer named Daniel Kraus, and then that book was in turn optioned by DreamWorks Animation to adapt as a feature film, with my friend and colleague Rodrigo Blas attached to direct, who came from Pixar and stuff like that. Around that time, some of my writing and stuff and made its way over to DreamWorks. And I found out later, I was being considered to maybe write the feature film. It had gone through a couple of drafts, but they were kind of looking for a new take. But then Mark Guggenheim, who created the Arrowverse, like he's a comic book writer. He's also written like Percy Jackson, and he also created Arrow on the CW and a few of the other spin-off shows.
The Flash, Supergirl.
Yes, exactly. He was like one of the 3 or 4 people that kind of created that show and was the showrunner of Arrow for several seasons. He was hired to write a draft of it. And just as he was in the process of writing, I think the first or second draft, Netflix came along and said, "Hey, we want to do a big deal with DreamWorks Animation and basically, buy 13 shows from you to fill out our platform." And they went through their library and they're like, "Yeah, this is fine. This is what about this?" And they pointed to Troll Hunters and said, "Can we make that into a TV show?" And then Mark kind of looked at the people at DreamWorks and Guillermo, and they were like, "Can we make it a TV show?" And of course, everybody said yes. And so then it was a TV show. So yeah,
Wow.
it's a really cool project. I'll be forever grateful that I got to be a part of it. So the premise is about Jim Lake Jr. and a few other of his sort of like hapless sort of outsider friends in high school stumble across a mysterious amulet that and basically chooses Jim as the protector and the guardian of the worlds between the supernatural and the human world. And he becomes the troll hunter, who's sort of a bounty hunter of rogue supernatural creatures. But just one
This
problem.
almost feels like a Vin Diesel thing.
Sort of, but the tweak it is, of course, he's a sort of powerless, relatively talentless teenage boy. Which
Okay, he's like the average Joe, I guess.
Yeah, he was never been chosen as this troll hunter before, and everyone thinks, did the amulet like break? Like, why did it choose this kid? But the problem is it's now bonded to him, and like it or not, he's in charge of saving the world from supernatural forces. And so that was sort of that's the back of the envelope description of the show. But what was really great about it was because Netflix was in it, early on in its animation sort of ventures. They basically gave us carte blanche, and they just really wanted to be in the Guillermo business, obviously. And Guillermo del Toro saw what we kind of proposed, like what we thought of where the show could go, and he was there regularly while making, I think, Crimson Peak or Shape of Water. He was there maybe every 4 or 5 weeks, and we would just kind of fill him in. Like,
that's really cool.
Want to do these episodes.
I wanted to ask about that. So you've met him, or he was in like the meetings with you guys and kind of discussing.
I mean,
that's really cool.
He was very hands-on.
Okay, it wasn't just let's slap his name on it because he had the book at some point. No, he was there. Okay.
No, that was and that was really an amazing opportunity to work on that show, because if you look at the people that worked on it, it truly is sort of a rogues gallery of truly talented and extraordinary people. That's where I met. Obviously, getting to work with Guillermo del Toro and Rodrigo Blas, who worked on The Incredibles and a bunch of other great Pixar movies. And then Mark Guggenheim, as I already mentioned, who is the showrunner and creator of a lot of great sci-fi and fantasy television. The Hageman brothers, who were brought on as the co-executive producers and head writers, who created Star Trek Prodigy. And then the writers' room was very small. It was myself, Chad Quant, who works on Troll Hunters and Tales and Star Trek Prodigy with me as well, and then AC Bradley, who went on to create Marvel's What If. And me, and so and before that, I had worked in features mostly and web series. I was also a writer producer for National Lampoon. I kind of bounced around.
They tagged you for a live action Brave Little Toaster.
Yes, that was a long ways back, but it was at a time when sort of IP being refashioned as live action CGI hybrid films was very successful. So the company, they did like Alvin and the Chipmunks and Stuart Little, which both made a ton of money, and they were looking to develop other properties, and they managed to get the rights to Brave Little Toaster, which was an old Disney film that everybody who made that went on to found Pixar. So it was actually like way better than it had any right to.
But John Lasseter still wants, I think to this day, wants to make it like a CG, like a more Pixar version of that film, right?
I would believe that, sure. Yeah. But at the time, this company was developing it, and they hired me to write The Brave Little Toaster and a movie treatment for Heathcliff, an old comic strip. That preceded Garfield, but Garfield outshined him, and so that was kind of the premise of my take on the character.
Stole the orange cat.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, why is that like fat lazy cat get all the praise? Well, Heathcliff is kind of left out to dry in the alleys or what have you. So I'd written some features, and what I really wanted to get into television, because feature films it's such a tumultuous world. And you can work for years on a project, and then maybe for whatever reason the funding falls away, the studio closes, the person who's in charge of the project gets fired, it just gets put on a shelf and then goes into what's called development turnaround, and you may never see the light. It may never see the light of day.
How does that
Whereas
affect your
television,
resume? You can't put that on your resume then?
I mean, I can put it on my resume, but I don't think it means much if the movie's not been made.
I
So
guess you can have positive feedback by the people that you worked with. I guess like
sure,
that can
yeah.
count.
And I think that is basically how I was able to get into television, is because they saw that they everybody who'd work with me was like, hey, he's great,
Mm.
and TV, what I liked about it, and why I was glad I got to work in it with Tales of Arcadia and onward for the last almost decade now, is, like it or not, it's getting made. If the money's being spent, it's going to wind up on the screen.
Yeah.
And the trade-off, of course, is that it's total chaos, and everybody is just by the skin of their teeth trying to get everything put together in time to actually broadcast and be on the air. But that's exciting in its own way, I suppose.
Well, did you guys have more freedom? Like the way I see, because I'm very exterior to all of this, but I noticed very early on that Netflix had like a DreamWorks deal because every friggin' movie that came out from DreamWorks was getting its own show. But
Yeah.
then I think that Netflix was kind of expecting a certain something from those specific shows. You have like there's like How to Train a Dragon. You kind of know what you want from that show. Whereas you guys didn't have a movie. So were you guys like allowed more freedom on that?
Yeah, that's kind of what was kind of nice about it, is that it was in many ways, Tales of Arcadia in particular was a grand experiment which pushed the boundaries of CGI animated television and storytelling in ways that had never been pushed before. Because we you're absolutely right, it was an original IP, so there wasn't really a guidebook of what box it had to
Yeah.
fit into. And so all we really had to go off of was one draft of a feature film, which, if you know anything about stories, like a story that could be told in an hour and a half versus a story that could be told over 52 half-hour episodes are going to be very different. So that was like the basic, all we really had from that was the basic premise of who the good guys and the bad guys were, and the kind of the plot, sort of.
Mm.
But then but obviously even that would change over time as you kind of adapted. And then I think it was, obviously the reason we got that sort of latitude and freedom is because they trusted Guillermo del Toro, who in turn trusted us, which was very great. And I remember like he worked with us in breaking out some of the broader story aspects, but then he would go off and shoot his movie, and then he'd come back and catch up. And I remember like he binge watched the first, he was only supposed to watch like 3 episodes, but he watched the first 3 episodes, and he was so blown away by them, he called his assistant and canceled his flight, and then proceeded to binge watch everything that we had done all the way.
That sounds like a thing he'd do.
Yeah. And at that point, he then called up everybody at Netflix and was like, just let the writers do what they want. Like,
No, really.
they know what they're doing. So in that regard, he very much, he believed in, he let the artists, and that wasn't just the writers, by the way, it was the directors, the storyboard artists, the art directors,
Well, did he inform a lot of the visuals? Like, did he have a pretty precise idea of how he wanted the visuals to look like?
Yeah, that like he always kind of had the final approval for sure. And very early on, he had a very specific concept of what he had in mind, which in terms of a visual language, which we in turn have sort of brought to Star Trek Prodigy as well.
Yes.
Which is, I think at least at the time, this is like 2013, 2014, I guess, a lot of television was still very much kind of like shot in tight close-ups, shot, reverse shot, establishing shot, but it didn't look very
TNG.
Right, yeah, in a way. But then compare that to like feature films where they're showing extreme wide shots and sprawling vistas and tracking camera movements and stark lighting and stuff like that. It's stuff that if you are expecting going into it, then you could do it. But in TV, I think there's a certain rhythm that Guillermo wanted to break break out of and say, no, we need to make this look as cinematic as possible because that's the story we're telling. And that's very much been the attitude that we carried over to Star Trek Prodigy as well. Is like, it's not about just doing the quick and dirty version. It's about doing the version that feels like epic,
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was Troll Hunters. That was 52 episodes, and then I think around just as we had written out, like I think the first season, there came a point where we were seeing the animatics and the story, and everyone was like, this is really good. Like, we should, like, do we really just want this to end at 52? It feels like there's so much story we could still tell. And so we started to have genuine conversations of just like, do we really want to just cap this off if there's so much story we could still kind of explore? And that's when we started to have serious conversations about developing it into basically an original sort of shared universe that would come together Avengers style. And at the time we were kind of pointing towards the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But even then, that felt like a weird idea for television because that really was so outside of the box. Of course, now, if you look at like what they're doing with Star Wars and with Marvel, like that's all they're doing is
let's credit the Arrowverse for a lot of like really trying to do, because Marvel did it like in film, I guess. But I know a lot of Trekkies would argue that Star Trek was doing it first, but it was
true.
They're borderline. It's kind of not the same thing, kind of.
Right. But that's also kind of funny because when I was writing Troll Hunters, there was a lot of elements that they were like, well, how do we find this tone of between like the human everyday world and this sort of like fantastical, strange world and these characters interacting and learning to come together? And I constantly reference Star Trek, because the trolls in that world very much I based on Klingon culture, where they are constantly just talking about how killing is much an easier process, but just in a very casual way. But you're right. And Mark, I think at the time, Arrow might have been the only one on the air. They might have, or maybe Flash had just started or something to that effect. So I think they were in the early processes of doing that in the air, creating the greater Arrowverse. But at the time, there wasn't even that many, like the Arrowverse hadn't even become the Arrowverse yet. But we knew that, but Mark obviously kind of took what he learned from our show and applied it to the TV format as well. But I remember it was in terms of like trying to do that in TV, I was like, it can work. And I think I even cited Star Trek, as you pointed out. But it's just funny that looking back at it now, where every IP franchise, especially Disney, is, and now Star Trek to a certain degree for Paramount, are doing the exact same thing where they are creating like an interconnected universe of TV shows. And Netflix eventually did too, with even prior to that, with like the Defenders and Daredevil and Punisher and stuff like that.
Well, there's no real disadvantage to it, I think. I mean, of course, there's the thing that everyone mentions, which is fatigue. Everyone's always scared that you could get, but from a monetary standpoint, it makes sense as a company. But then from a creative standpoint, it makes sense as well, because then so many different artists can kind of like have fun within the universe themselves, and just the whole kind of like creative process of being able to bring the universe together, if you can, in like crossover events or big finales, that kind of stuff. There's no real downside.
Yeah, I think the key, as you said, though, is just giving each element kind of its own flavor and identity. So that way, it, because I think if you just released 20 Iron Man movies, I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe would be dead. But they didn't. They kind of, each hero kind of had their own flavor. Ant-Man is a very different movie from Captain America, is a very different movie from Thor.
The casting has a lot to do with it. I think you really need to find like actors that can pull off different tones and really embody different characters.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, with Tales of Arcadia, we did just that. And so we started seeding in like these other kind of like things where if you only watch Troll Hunters, like maybe you'd be like, oh, that was sort of an odd thing. But then if you went back and watched the other shows, you realize like, oh, that was setting up this whole other universe in these little seeded hints. And so that goes Troll Hunters and Three Below, which kind of leans more into the science fiction aspects of this world, and then Wizards, which goes full high fantasy, but of course with the spin of these sort of hapless
Yeah, I was
teenagers
gonna
thrown
say,
into it.
by looking at the, because again, I haven't seen these, I apologize, but looking at like the visuals of it, it does feel like it's a mix of both fantasy and sci-fi that you're
Yeah,
going for.
which is rare, but it's something Guillermo really wanted to try
Well,
because it was all.
there's a very old, well, now there were recent ones coming up. There's a Belge bande dessinée called Torgal,
Mhm.
which you know of this, or you don't know of this?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's basically about a Viking guy, but he's not a Viking. He's actually an Atlantean.
Oh,
He's
cool.
the man from the stars, and he was found in like a cradle from the stars in a Viking village, and so he's living in the time of the Vikings, but he's
Oh,
actually from
that's so
space. So
cool.
there's so much sci-fi going on, but also all the Norse mythology and all the gods, they exist in this universe. So there's all those fantasy elements that are dragged into it as well.
Yeah,
So
that's so cool.
I really like the, yeah, I've been waiting for like someone to make a show about that for years, but yeah, no, I really like the idea of mixing science fiction and fantasy together. I think that it becomes kind of like high fantasy or just out of the box kind of random stuff, but I really love it. I really love that
Yeah.
marriage, I guess.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun to do that, in tandem with as Marvel was doing the same thing. Because I don't remember exactly when the first Avengers movie came out, but I think it came out while we were making.
2012 maybe, I think it was.
Oh, was it? Okay. But I remember, I feel like it came out like just before we were doing what we were doing, and so it made it a little easier for people to, when we were
Mm.
selling the idea, obviously, like, see, they did it. They're clearly not going to stop doing this. Like, let's get, it's a sign of the times. But doing it with all original characters was, I think, an even more interesting challenge, because Marvel, at the very least, you at least had that sort of legacy fan base of like, people could just point to the comic books and say, hey, here's the history of Black Widow.
Yeah, and they have had team ups. They have had full like Avengers comic books beforehand. Like these characters have done these fights together before. Yeah.
Yeah. So trying to do that with an entirely original cast and premise and stuff was very interesting. And it was obviously, we had other limitations. For instance, like, I think it was Orson Welles who said that the absence of limitations is the enemy of art. So we did have to create sort of a box for ourselves to play in, so it wasn't just like anything goes, because I feel like that can actually, when you even great artists or writers or directors, when you take away all all restrictions, sometimes they kind of go off the deep end.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the easy way that the online people, kind of explain it. It's like, oh, well, they gave this guy, $300 million. It's like, it's too much. It works
Right.
better with like 50. You know what I mean? Just keep them constrained.
Yeah, and
It,
and
it
sometimes it's just
forces
having.
you to find more creative, I guess, solutions to the problems that you have.
Yeah, and that happens all the time. And sometimes you are like, no, this is how I was envisioning it, but then someone will maybe bring up either a budgetary constraint, or even just a story constraint,
Time.
or time, or we don't have time to do that. Yeah. So you were forced to, like, okay, how can I evoke the spirit of what I want, but also address this note? And then in doing so, you wind up achieving some sort of third path, a middle way,
Mhm.
that sort of synthesizes the spirit of both in an unexpected sort of manifestation, and it becomes way more original and interesting than if you had just done the, for lack of a better term, the easy path, or the path of least resistance. And then it becomes this sort of engine of ingenuity, like you invent new creative solutions to things that make it even better than it would have been if you'd just gone with your initial instinct. But yeah, that's Tales of Arcadia, and then it capped. So we did three sort of series, Troll Hunters, Three Below, Wizards, and then it capped off with a feature film that was co-written by the Hageman brothers and Mark Guggenheim. But I worked on Troll Hunters and Wizards, and on Troll Hunters I was a writer, and then on Wizards I was a co-executive producer and co-showrunner, alongside Guillermo and Mark and Chad.
So this basically means you have more creative, I guess, input. You have more say on what ends up in the final cut.
Yeah, as a showrunner and a producer, I suppose you have more that like as a showrunner specifically, the buck typically stops with you. Like people will you give them sort of you give them the target and say
Yeah.
this is what I think we're going to go for, and you unleash your the army of your show onto trying to get that to work. And then it comes back to you for approval, for notes and stuff, and then you're basically the funnel between your production and the studio and the network and the people that are paying for your thing, who give you notes, and it's your choice on how to address them, or delegate for other people to address them. But ultimately, it's up to you to provide that box, provide that target for your team, in order to have the best possible chance at successfully creating whatever story you're trying to tell.
So transitioning that into, actually, I do have a final thing. I kind of feel like the whole Tales of Arcadia is kind of like the precursor to what Arcane is now on Netflix, like in the style.
Yeah, I don't think Arcane would exist if it weren't for Troll Hunters. I don't, yeah, and at least not on Netflix, because
Well,
I think
now that we've discussed it, and I understand kind of like where you guys are coming from, and like how the show was envisioned, I kind of feel like, yeah, it was something that permitted Arcane to come alive and be something.
yeah, because obviously League of Legends existed,
Oh yeah.
beforehand, but I think Netflix, when they saw what we were capable of in Troll Hunters, that was the first time somebody had tried to make an entire TV series look like a Pixar movie. And the fact that we were able to do such epic storytelling and that sort of thing, it really kind of lit a fire under Netflix to seek out more of that sort of content, and basically provided an avenue for them to try to push even further into adult animation, which is exactly what Arcane is. I know Arcane in particular, I didn't work on the show, but I know a few people who know people who worked on it. But that was very much a long time coming. And that what was interesting about that is, at least my understanding is, they wound up producing at least the first season entirely independently. So the company just kind of made it on their own time, and then went out and found a buyer for it.
Okay. The company being, is it Riot Games themselves
Yes,
working on
I
this?
believe so. Yeah, they
Okay.
had pretty much complete. I mean, again, I can't speak for them, but the way what I've gleaned from it is they had a lot of creative control, and they just kind of made it on their own time and on their own dime, and then
Well,
marketed
that
it.
makes sense because, like, video game company, well, I mean, League of Legends or World of Warcraft, they have huge lore. They have storytellers and creators that are just writing so much lore and creating so much, and they have so many talented animators making all of their like cutscenes and little promotional
Yeah,
features that they have. So yeah, it makes sense that they would actually do it on their own. They're
yeah,
completely capable of doing it. But yeah, then you need someone to be able to distribute it. You can't just have it on your own website. There's not enough
yeah.
traffic, right?
Yeah, and I have no idea how that deal manifested. When Netflix was like, "Hey, can we buy it?" But I do know that at least for a very long time they were doing it entirely in house, and just basically betting that there was enough of an audience for it that they could recoup their money and then
Good
some.
bit.
And clearly it paid off, because So you're welcome, Arcane. We seeded the fields for you.
You are to Arcane what Rome was for Game of Thrones. The
Yeah.
people don't, not enough people have seen Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so transitioning into Prodigy, but I want to keep with this kind of like executive producer or showrunner thing. You guys have Alex Kurtzman, because it's like there's a Hageman Brothers, but then there's Alex Kurtzman, which is like he's the top boss up the
Yeah.
top. Is he like just like kind of an extra layer? Does he like you guys do whatever you want with? Like, does he let the Hageman Brothers say that you guys are the showrunners, you do what you want? Or is he kind of checking in and making
Yeah,
sure
I
you have
mean,
to
I think
stick to some sort of
I mean, yeah, I think the way I can't say this is how it's always been, because I wasn't there at Secret Half from the beginning, but I know Alex Kurtzman was he co-created Discovery, and he was kind of put in charge of creating this box, so
yeah.
so to speak, of like, this is what we think that the format for Star Trek is moving forward, and I believe he has sort of final say on and approval to like we send everything to him for notes and whatnot. But I will say he's given at least I can't speak for every show, but for our show, he has given us considerable creative liberty. And as soon as he saw what we were doing, he basically said like, just keep doing what you're doing. We'll and if I have any thoughts, I'll let you know.
Okay. Well,
And
when you've got talented, professionals doing it, just let them handle it, I guess.
yeah, and I think once he saw what we were trying to accomplish, he gave us a lot of creative freedom as artists, and usually the thoughts that he has are purely additive, but for the most part, it is very much the buck stops, I think, with the Hagemans and
Okay.
Ben Ebal, and on the writing side, myself now. And it's actually a very supportive, and I will say the same for both Secret Hideout and the Nick and CBS teams in Paramount Plus. They are all extremely supportive and give us a lot of leeway to just make the story as best we can the way we want to make it. And it's a very rare thing that I think that everybody, both the studios, the networks, and the production companies involved have given us, and it's I'm very grateful for that, because that doesn't always happen on a television
Yeah, I was
show
gonna
or
say
movie.
you guys don't have any trouble like juggling, I guess, like all of these flags that you guys are under, because there's a lot of like companies here that all have
Yeah, I mean,
maybe different agendas, I guess, or maybe different visions for what it is that they want.
yeah, I mean that was always, I think there was a little bit of a balancing act right when we started, because obviously CBS, now Paramount, had not really been in the kids animated series game outside of Nickelodeon for a very long time.
Mm.
Like they always just kind of said that's Nickelodeon's thing, whatever. Likewise,
But then again,
Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon never really done anything like Prodigy, right?
That's what I was gonna say. On the flip side of that is, like, Nickelodeon had not done anything quite like young adult, like, with real emotions and cinematic sort of
Yeah.
sweeping scope and epicness. The closest they had, I think, was like Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Korra, but even that was a few years ago, and
Mm.
even that was a slightly younger tone in some ways, and certainly not to the scope of CGI animation.
Doug. Things like Doug had emotion, but
Yeah, but like but for in terms of CGI animation, I don't think I'm out of bounds by saying that Prodigy is the most ambitious show that has ever come out of Nickelodeon and Paramount.
yeah.
So everybody kind of like, and obviously Secret Hideout, it was sort of given the reins of the Star Trek franchise, and making sure it adheres to all the other Star Trek shows as well. So you're not wrong that there were a lot of sort of moving parts, but thankfully, they all kind of like looked to us and said, well, you do your take and we'll discuss. And when we did our take, they all pretty much they got what we were doing, and gave us the room to do it, and I think that's very nice. I think in the early days there was a little bit of a question of like, how on the sliding scale of like, how far do we go towards like skewing towards the kids of the Nickelodeon audience? How far do we skew it towards the hardcore Star Trek fans? Because the
That's the real
purpose,
balancing act, isn't it?
right? And that's the
Trying to
purpose.
write a show that works as much for like these old angry Star Trek fans that we are, and that works just as well for kids.
But I know a lot of hay has been made of like, is this the first animated show for young people and this and that? But regardless, I think it's the first one that that has had to deal with 50 years of lore and fandoms and the expectations of what Star Trek is about, and finding a way to bring in new and young audiences that don't already know all that stuff.
Yes.
And so
Yes,
that,
because
I think,
Picard handles the past, Picard handles TNG, etc. But it's very much, I'm not going to say it's made for the people that have already seen TNG, but it's really, Picard is clearly not the show to introduce someone to Star Trek with, right? Like you
yeah.
can't really jump in with that show.
Yeah, and I think you'd be hard pressed to say that Star Trek the animated series, for instance, was made for people who had never seen Star Trek the original series.
No, I'm not sure.
Like,
No, I don't
I'm
think
pretty
so.
sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was made for people who are already Trekkies, perhaps, or for at least familiar with the premise. So yeah, I think that was the real balancing act that we were trying to sort of skew, is like how far and how quickly can we go down towards what people would consider traditional Star Trek, and how do we get there, and how do we have that be a story that makes sense for our young people, and very quickly we kind of realized that product that's as much as there's been like little hints of it here or there hasn't really been a story yet that starts with people outside of the Federation looking in. Like there's been episodes certainly and a few storylines here or there, but we never had a story that starts with those strange new worlds and civilizations and journeys towards Starfleet and comes to embrace the ideas of the Federation. And like, how do you start this sort of with this unmolded clay of people that maybe have the potential to be great Starfleet officers one day, and get them, and how do they get there? And that once we kind of realized that I think unlocked a lot of doors, because it fits perfectly into it, and it almost makes you wonder why this hasn't been done before, because you hear all these stories about like people and people online saying, oh gosh, I want to see what's going on outside the Federation. I want to see an all alien crew. I want to see what's going on Earth outside of Starfleet. Like there's all
I do
this.
think that was a bit scary for like, I guess Viacom CBS earlier on, like to say we're gonna make a show it's just Klingons, or to make a show it's just Romulans. I think that the industry was very much like, we need human-centric shows. You know what I mean? Because you don't even have one human. Like the only human you have on the show, as it stands, is like a holographic representation of Janeway.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason we were able to do that, besides just the fact that we wanted to push the boundaries of, well, we're an animated format, let's take advantage of it, right? So like we wanted to see alien designs and concepts that would be more difficult to do in a live action show. And we wanted to showcase the true scope and depth of the types of aliens and stuff that you might have all sort of seen or heard referenced or whatnot in Star Trek, but they couldn't really show all the time. So that's why you have like Zero, who's obviously a Medusan, who appeared in US, but even then you never really see what a Medusan looks like outside of like, at one point you see just like almost like Quentin Tarantino suitcase opening. You see it open and you see light hit somebody and they go,
mad props to whoever designed like Zero's kind of like Medusan cloudy aspect for your guys' show, because the idea, you guys have like the most realistic smoke render going on inside, and it feels so much like a TOS thing, where they would film smoke on like some sort of transparent or black background, and then they would try to use that. I don't know, it feels very TOS. So mad props to them. I love it.
Yeah, our art design team and viz dev team is incredible, and everybody in that department, Alejandro, I think, is the head of it, underneath Ben Iban. They walk a tightrope as well, because obviously everything can't just, this is a decade, every show, every generation has a different sort of new technology, new ships and stuff. So it can't just look like the way it did in TNG. It's like we're 10, 15 years later, it needs to have its own identity, but it also can't be so divorced from everything you've seen that you don't understand it and it doesn't look like Star Trek. So then finding like, well, okay, how do we actually, what does Starfleet look like 5, 10 years later, after they've found all this incredible technology the Voyager brought back, and after they've defeated the Borg and have started venturing out and evolving and stuff. And finding ways, because even in Star Trek Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and stuff, every time they unveiled a new ship, there was a little bit of controversy. I remember people were like, is the Defiant really like a Star Trek ship? Like photon cannons really?
How does it create a warp bubble?
Yeah, photon cannons, they just look like Star Wars, but now everyone loves the Defiant. So like but that's the fun of it, right? Is like if we only stuck to the ship designs and the alien designs that we have, we wouldn't have any new cool ships that you can buy on Eagle Moss. So
exactly, right. Do you guys have like a nice blend of people that, because I'm assuming that you're like a pretty old school Trekkie there? Yeah.
I am, yes.
Okay. So do you guys have a nice blend of people that were very much in love with Star Trek and people that kind of don't know about it or didn't know about it before they came on?
I think it's a spectrum. I think there's a pretty healthy balance of people that really love Star Trek. I think to work on a Star Trek show, inevitably you're going to attract some people that like the Star Trek.
Drop everything. I'm
Um,
working on that.
yeah. In terms of the spectrum, you have what's kind of great is Ben and our whole team have a great eye for artists, right? And so they are willing to kind of dig a little deeper and find people from anywhere. Like we literally have artists, I think, from every continent aside from maybe Antarctica, um, doing various visual development stuff for us, or background designs, or map paintings. It's really quite amazing, so and it's what's funny about Star Trek is like it's because it's so intrinsic to world our sort of global culture that everyone at least has heard of Star Trek,
Yeah.
um, but then it's I think endemic on the sort of council of elders that we've created on the show, of like both the people that want to push things from a design aspect, and then the hardcore Trekkies saying you can do that, but just make sure the nacelles have blue and red on them, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Of finding the design language so it's a nice balance, and finding the references of like, here's what it looked like 10 years ago, so just try to make it feel like the next evolution of that, or something that might have evolved as here's what it looked like in Nemesis, here's what it looks like in Picard, so what would it look like in that intervening 20-year span. And of course, even on Picard, we obviously haven't seen that many Federation ships, like not
Oh,
hardly at
really?
all. Like we saw a bunch in the season 2 premiere, but before that, I think there was like the Zheng She, is that how you say it?
You
And
talking
then
you talking about the one from the finale there?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we saw a couple of shuttles, but then I don't think you really see any other Star Trek ships beyond that in season 1. So like there is kind of like a lot of latitude, and obviously the Federation has a lot of ships. There's a lot of other alien ships out there, any on classic Star Trek, it seemed like every week you saw like a brand new weird looking ship from a new alien. So it's
Well, they did a lot of that with like Voyager and Enterprise too. Enterprise especially because they were in the age of CG. So every time they could do like an alien of the week, they would go crazy with the ship.
Yeah, for sure. So that's that. Yeah, it's a balance, I think, of like because we don't want it just to be like it's just the greatest hits, because then you're like, all right, well, I could just go back and watch the old show for that. We want to find a nice balance of legacy stuff and familiar, and also brave new worlds and civilizations, new ships, new technology. Like that's what Star Trek is so cool about, is like finding a way to blend all that together and make it feel like it's of the whole.
Absolutely.
So
And I gotta say, I for as much as I love and we'll talk about your episode in a bit there, but for as much as I love when you guys, Lower Decks, Discovery, everyone, Picard, they bring back characters or things from older shows. What I find really rewarding is when new characters and new stories develop and we can really get like new moments to cherish. Because as much as we all love Odo, we've seen 7 seasons of Odo. You know what I mean?
right.
So if we can get like a moment between Dahl and goddamn it, what's she called? Gwyn. If we can get a moment between them where she kind of just smiles and it's a very silent but very very powerful moment because she realizes that he came back for her.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of moment that I really enjoy, and it gives us a new moment to cherish in the franchise.
Yeah, and that's always at the forefront of our minds as we're making this show. Like anytime we have a legacy character, it's not that we don't want them just to come in and take over the show and then it's just like, it's a Voyager sequel now. Like with it's not that's because first and foremost, this is the story about our young crew, right? And if we do bring in a new legacy character, as you said, it needs to have a meaningful impact on our hero's journey. It's not just there just like, hey, look, it's Scotty, hooray. As much as I love those, like Relics is one of my favorite episodes of TNG, and that's mostly what it is. But the reason Relics works is because they found a character journey for it, both for Scotty himself, of somebody who's sort of out of time. And, I still think about that time when he goes to the holodeck kind of drunk on whiskey and calls up the old Constitution class bridge and is just drinking alone in there. Like
I feel that way when I'm reminiscing of old YouTube content from like 10 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, you're absolutely right in that it needs to have an impact and have a purpose, you know. And I think anytime you're dealing with a show that is sort of torch passing in a way, or at least sort of like this is a new wing that's being added onto the Star Trek franchise, I think you need a healthy balance of acknowledging what came before, but also seeing how this new story is evolving it and is reacting to it. And perhaps in some ways, you know, in the case of legacy characters in particular, showing that even they might have a little bit more story for their characters. You know, like they didn't just stop growing when season 7 finale hit. You know, they might have a little bit extra to learn. And that's something that Kate Mulgrew in particular on our show says that she loves about our show and is always supportive, is it's like the theme that the old can never stop learning from the young. And I think that has been sort of like a guiding principle for us too, is like, not only why we're following these kids, but also the impact, not just that the legacy characters have on these young would-be cadets or what have you, but the other way around as well, and helping keep the idealism and the hope and the possibilities of those horizons of Star Trek alive for, you know, these vanguards who maybe, you know, are kind of entering their twilight, you know, their best days behind them, and you know, it's an interesting sort of balance. I think that I feel very honored and privileged to be able to kind of explore.
Surely. And I'm not gonna jump in too much to like I guess the rest of season 1 or season 2, because I'm sure you're not allowed to say anything, so we won't go too much into that. But I will say that in regards to the Hollow Janeway that we've had up until now, I do find it really good how you guys have managed to make her quite distinct from Janeway herself. Like it doesn't feel like I'm just watching Janeway. It really feels like Hollow Janeway is a character in and of itself. And I mean, there is a line to that effect, which is what would the real Janeway do?
Yes.
But it's like, yeah, no, this character is kind of how like the Doctor on Voyager is a whole character, but he's a hologram. This is the same thing. It's Janeway. This is the Janeway hologram. It's not the same thing as Janeway.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the sort of tack that we took. We were like, what if you took some of these personality engrams of Janeway and then overlaid it into this holographic character whose primary feature is to basically to guide, to instruct, to help.
There's like a characterless almost blueprint to the function of this hologram, I guess.
Yeah.
And then you overlay the Janeway kind of like quirks onto it, I guess, or the Janeway character onto it.
Yeah, and then those two elements then begin to meld and inform each other and grow, just like with the EMH, with the Doctor, until they kind of become something. They grow beyond their programming and become their own character unto itself. And that's deeply reflected whenever you saw the Doctor, you know, with Zimmerman, right? His creator, and they are very different people. And even though they're modeled and look kind of the same, although obviously Zimmerman's older, but it's very interesting just to kind of see that contrast.
I feel a Janeway and Hollow Janeway thing coming up. But that's interesting because then it kind of gives, we have all of these kids that are learning about the Federation and Starfleet, and you know, they're slowly, I guess, going into like the Star Trek mold that we know of. And so Hollow Janeway is kind of going through the same story.
Yeah, and I think it in some way, this is sort of an abstract premise, but it's in some ways it reminds me a little bit of like, you know, Worf, right? Worf's relationship to the Klingons, you know, because he felt like Klingons are about honor and you know, blood feuds and this, but then when he kind of got pulled into that world, he realized that it was nothing like the idealistic
scheming and Romulans.
Yeah. but in bringing that idealism into it, it almost sort of like helped reform the empire back to what it originally should have been.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that we're going to say that Star Trek is or sorry, Starfleet is falling apart, but I think that there's, as I said before, like, with like with legacy characters like Vice Admiral Janeway, who we introduced, in the finale coming after them. I think we want even those type of characters to be reminded of what Starfleet really is about and what the core ideals are, because I think sometimes it can be very easy to get caught in the weeds of like the letter of the law versus the spirit, which is true for Star Trek fans too, I would argue sometimes.
Yeah. But I mean, you guys are juggling post Lower Decks, which is very much like TNG Voyager, kind of like the ideals and the Star Trek that we know. But you guys are also juggling the pre-Picard, which is, and I'm not going to say it's already the downfall of the Federation, but they've kind of showed us in that first season that the Federation was already maybe faltering, or they were, I'm not going to say like they're full on xenophobic there, but they made a big deal about not helping the Romulans as much as they could have or should have.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily xenophobia, but
no.
But I think and I've talked about this in other interviews too. In this particular era, in the lead up to obviously, the first contact day and Utopia Planitia, I think the reason that it became such an issue was that Starfleet this is an era where Starfleet is expanding further and faster than they've ever gone before. Voyager
resource distribution must be such a hassle, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like resources literally at a certain point. I think that's why they started implementing the A500 fleet, was because they just simply didn't have the manpower, so they needed androids to help keep up. And then so when those and if you listen to that conversation, when the androids get shut down, it's not just like, oh, they're not available to build this one fleet, because Picard comes back to them and says, hey, if I just activate reserves and volunteers and pull additional resources, I can still do like a lesser version of the evacuation. And they say, no, we can't. That it would be too great of a drain at this point, which implies that the Starfleet was spread really thin, and they were counting on those A500s to kind of start filling the gap.
Starfleet is almost impoverished at that point, basically.
Yeah, when you suddenly have a third of your resources get suddenly cut out from under you, and you have just to survive, you have to sort of cut programs, cut back, pull back, and try to reassess, and that's hard. And I think that's partially what Picard was dealing with in the show in 2385 onward. But of course, our show isn't there yet. Like it's our show.
You guys are in 2383, right?
Well, as of the finale, it's now 2384.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one spoiler question, which you don't have to answer, because
I'll answer if I can.
Okay, maybe you don't even know this. If your guys' show will survive long enough, and I'm sure it will, till the point where you get to 2387, will you guys address like the Romulus supernova in your show in some way?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is this: we're not going to ignore the events, especially the important events that happen in Star Trek, because that's canon.
That makes sense. Yeah,
like canon is canon. If something important happened anywhere, like if we're not going to have them just go to the Tribble homeworld and then be like, wait a second, the Tribble homeworld was blown up by the Klingon. Like it's canon is canon, right? So like if stuff happens, it happens in our show too.
Yeah, the continuity stays.
I think the question is of course like how it interacts with or intersects with our show, and how heavily, and if heavily, we'll find a way to address it again in a way that impacts our characters.
Okay, it's just because at this point, it's a huge, big ass thing, and we've kind of addressed it on Picard, but I've never actually it hasn't had its place in a prime timeline show.
Yeah,
and I'm not I don't mean to throw shit at Mike McMahon, but I'm not really counting on Lower Decks to handle the Romulus supernova in the most, I guess, emotional way.
Well, I think Mike has said in interviews and to us, like he actually isn't really interested in pushing that far
No,
into
I
this.
don't think so anyway.
He wants to keep it in this sort of like prime.
Yes.
He wants to keep it in that like the early 2380s.
Yeah, but that makes sense. You guys' show is TV 7? Is that from what I recall? It's like 7 years and up.
Yeah,
Is that it? Or how did you guys envision it?
well, the rating system for animation, I don't really have much in the way of control over that or anything, but we envision it as a show for everybody. Like
Okay.
when we created it, we said we want this to be a co-viewing experience that young people can watch with their parents or their grandparents, and everybody will get something out of it.
My
Like that
daughter's
was
3. She's maybe a bit young for this show. Because
it's
I have had set her down, and I will say that some episodes do interest her more than others. And I
yeah,
still can't figure out which ones. I think it's where there's more shooting that she's not like she kind of zones out.
sure.
But she really loved like the whole, the chicken, the fox, and the what is it?
Sure.
What
Yeah,
is
the
it?
chicken, the fox, and the grain.
That's it.
Uh,
And the boat, so she was very much tuned in for all of that.
yeah, I think it just depends on the family, but I think definitely like I've seen just as pure colloquially, I found that sort of like 5, 6, 7 onward will
Mm.
enjoy it a little more just because you know
Well, they have a greater understanding, I guess, of what's going
yeah, I
on.
think it helps in that regard. We didn't specifically make this for 3-year-olds, but I have gotten people tweeting at me saying my 3-year-old loves the show and loves Murph. So like I don't have a problem with that at all. Like my introduction to Star Trek, I was literally about 3, and and my dad, I was sitting. It's like one of my earliest memories ever. And I was sitting on the couch with my dad, and the sweeping fanfare was playing, and I saw the secondary hull separating from the saucer, and I realized I was watching. Years later, I realized I was watching the live premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation on television way back in September of 1987, and so like that was one of my first, and I think I was just feeding off the excitement of my dad. Like I was like, this is very exciting. I don't know why, and I didn't really know what was going on. I remember the ship was flying and there was a net or something. Like I didn't, but I've since gone back and have really appreciated Encounter at Farpoint and all of the series. But so in that regards, like you know, even if they're just absorbing it by osmosis, I don't have a problem with young people younger than TDY7 watching it. But we never wrote it specifically for kids or specifically for adults. We wrote it for everybody. This is a great Star Trek pun, but it's also a Hollywood term. There's a term called 4-quadrant storytelling. And 4-quadrant basically means young, old, men, women. You get everybody together, and
Everyone.
we'll enjoy it equally. And those are like your Indiana Jones movies, your Amblin, E.T., like movies that have depth and profundity, but aren't so niche that most people can't get something out of it. That's kind of what we've been trying to go for. Whether we succeed or not, that's always something that the Hagemans and myself are very interested in, telling those kinds of stories, because those are the
Well,
ones
it's very
we grew up with.
complicated, I think, to balance. Like, because you guys have so much to balance. You have to balance the fact that it's Star Trek, first of all, a huge thing, with the fact that you want to tell a new story. You have to balance the fact that it's both for grown-ups and for I guess the younger audience.
Mhm.
There's a lot of challenges that go into this. I did want to ask you about Kobayashi,
Okay, sure.
and I just wanted to ask how long it took you to find the dialogue that you needed to be able to write that episode.
I mean, it was a journey. I'll say that. A lot of people just assume that there's just some database that you can just kind of type in and find that stuff, but there isn't.
No, we
There
would
really
know
is.
about everyone would know about that database. Like we'd have it online somewhere.
Yeah, like no, I had to do a bunch of reverse Boolean searches and Google searches, and there are thankfully a number of Star Trek fan transcript sites that kind of helped me.
Hmm.
There were some lines that I knew going in that I was writing towards, like Dal hearing from Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and in your own way, you're as stubborn as another captain I once knew. Like so there was a few key lines that I knew I wanted to pull from, but beyond that, it was, because obviously in Wrath of Khan, you didn't have Savick stopping and saying, "Wait, what's the neutral zone?" so, I had the scenes wound up changing, and I had to find ways to have characters talk about what the neutral zone was, or what this or that. So that's why we wound up borrowing from like Balance of Terror or this or that. There was also a number of other sort of both legal and just logistical complexities of whether or not we could use
jacking from the films and the shows is different, right?
Yeah, whether we could use the movies or not, which movies we could use, which movies had isolated tracks and which didn't, which TV shows, whether the audio was clean enough or the right context. So,
well, you guys do have varying audio qualities.
Yeah,
in the show, but it's fine. It can be excused by the fact that it's a hologram. So yeah, that's fine.
But believe it or not, there was some audio that was even worse and rougher than what we found. And we, they did clean it up to the best they could. But you're right. We ultimately realized, it's a holodeck simulation, first of all, and second of all, it's not the worst thing in the world for the audience to be reminded that these are real performances from other shows, because if nothing else, it will encourage you to go back and be curious and yes, watch the original performances, which was in many ways the point of it to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all told, I wound up having to, I think I rewatched about 40 or 50 episodes of Star Trek top to bottom.
Just finding excuses to watch episodes on the job now.
Well, at a certain point, it was more like I thought I'd find the line. I read about maybe like 80 or 90 scripts top to bottom. And sometimes I'd think I'd found the line, and then I'd go in and realize that somebody was talking over them, or they were picking up a glass or something, and it was like rattling. The microphone was,
oh my God, I didn't even think of that. There's like all these sound effects and everything that's going on in the scene that can affect that.
Yeah, because sometimes even when you have the isolated dialogue track, it's still picking up something else, or they're muffled, or their shirt muffles, or they're turning, or in a lot of the original series, there were actually just some really bad audio edits, like just in the actual original track that we couldn't really get around. It was just like, and like they didn't have the biggest budget back then. Nobody anticipated Star Trek becoming what it was back then. So it's just literally just like one. I've seen production still since then of just like one dude with a boom mic, recording on a magnetic tape, just trying to catch their performances as they're doing it. Like it's not like what we have today, where everybody has lavaliers and So yeah, it was a process of several months. Just kind of going back and forth. I kind of started with a basic version, and then at one point I went a little overboard, and I had something like 9 or 10 characters populating the bridge, and then they said we physically cannot make that many characters. So then I had to peel back, and then some people that we were anticipating recording, unfortunately couldn't do it, or they as we were in the process of sending negotiating all that they like Renee passed away. So then I was like, well, that seems kind of like we can't just not have him in it now. Just that feels like almost
okay. So that informed like Odo's presence in the final cut.
Yeah, well, originally we had written original lines. We were going to try to bring Renee in.
Oh, that's really cool.
But we, as things just got harder, I almost became more resolute. I'm like, no, I'm going to make this work, and so I think originally I had written Worf in there. I think Data was in there at one point. I think. Was
Brent Spiner willing to come back to do Data, or were you gonna have to?
Well, interestingly enough, I think he was still doing Data at the time that we were potentially recording
Picard
or Picard season 1. So at one point there was like a window.
You would have hitched.
Yeah.
Off of that. Okay.
But the issue then was like, well, when you have Data and Spock in the same scene, they're kind of occupying the same space. They kind of do the same thing in terms of the archetype of the scientific sort of stoic. So the
Well, unless you're molding a scene specifically about the two of them interacting, I guess,
yeah,
yeah,
what it
they're
means to be
occupying.
human. Yeah,
Yeah,
but this was not that. This was a Star
this was
Trek
all for
scene
Dahl.
about. Yeah, this was Star Trek characters trying to solve the Kobayashi Maru. So there wouldn't have been an opportunity to have Spock and Data talk about what it means to be human. They're kind of busy with the Klingon ships that are going to blow up. Um, so yeah, at one point I think I had Trip in there as well from
Oh my
Enterprise.
God, people would have gone crazy for that.
I know. It's but ultimately it came down to just we had to just make the best thing that we could with the components that we had, and I think I think in the end, at least seeing the reaction, people seem to be very pleased.
Oh well, I
And
mean, this has been praised as like the trials and tribulations,
right,
of this new model. I guess the current era of Star Trek here.
which was a major which was a major influence on why when I first pitched the idea, I thought it might actually work, because I was like, they've already done it on Deep
Mm.
Space Nine, and I was like, this will be more complicated, but perhaps more original, have its own original take on that sort of stuff.
Well, it's very unique. Like
Yeah,
no one's done this specific kind of crossover, I guess, or event in Star Trek yet.
no, and it's just funny because like they've already laid the ground rules of what. There's no reason it couldn't happen. Like there's even like a Spock hologram in Unification 2. Like you have all of the components there. You see like in Barclay's private, on holodeck, he has ready-made holodeck characters of all Star Trek, all of his crew. Like it's not that hard for the computer just to say, make me a crew of all these people. But it just hadn't been done, I think, for logistical reasons of trying to get that many people in one room at the same time. It's, I think in live action, it posed an issue that
Yeah.
animation made it slightly more feasible. But yeah, I mean, and I think there's always a part of me that's just like, oh, if we only had a little bit more time, we could have finessed this or that. It could have been a little bit different. But I'm very glad that people recognize it for what it was, which was meant to be like a love letter and an homage to all of these amazing
Yes.
performances and characters and everything that Star Trek has given us, over the past 55 years. And it was eye-opening for me in a way, because I realized as I was kind of piecing all these different performances together that there is sort of like a sort of Star Trek scene, and they were all kind of like emerging from different performances in different eras to create what Star Trek is in this sort of like 30,000 feet sort of presence. And it was very emotional at times, and I took it very seriously. And
It grew on me a lot more. The first time I watched it, like, and I did not enjoy it the first time I watched it, but I guess I was overwhelmed. I was like, what the hell just happened? And then I almost felt a little, I was like, I love all these legacy characters, but did it take away from like my new characters and their adventure? But then when you look at it and you really watch it, you're like, no, there is a story in there about the new characters and about the new story. But then you have this added bonus, almost this gift to like the fandom, to like all the Trekkies that we are, and to the franchise. And that's just like an added bonus to it.
yeah, and that was, I think, very important from the beginning. Was like the whole point of it wasn't just for Dal to have fun on the holodeck. That's the fun icing, I think, of any holodeck
Mm.
episode. But ultimately, it was his journey, and then the B story with Gwen finding her place on the crew. You know, that like this was an inflection point for Dal's character, because he had a few episodes leading up to it where sort of his Ferengi upbringing showed
His
itself a little bit.
arrogance, maybe, I don't know. His
Yeah, a little bit of impulsiveness, a little bit of arrogance that's covering up a deep felt insecurity of like deep down he seems to know that he might not actually be a good captain and doesn't know what he's doing. So him being confronted by that in the Kobayashi Maru test, which is the ultimate test, and the point of it is to break down a captain and say, this is what it looks like when you fail. Confront it head on, and
Yeah.
let's and then rebuild you from the ground
So
up.
0. What was it? 0.3%.
Yes, But that's the point of the Kobayashi Maru. Like even in the old movies, is to see how you deal with a hopeless situation, how you confront death and failure, and having Dal experience that firsthand, even if there was a little bit of fun and humor and fantasy wish fulfillment to it. That was the point of it, and I think that the fact that we were able to that still was able to come through, at least on a rewatch, I think is was always important to me. And dovetailing that into the storyline with Gwen as she feels completely lost. She doesn't know what her role is anymore, and then it becomes about like, well, we're all part of, for better for worse, we're all part of the same crew now. We're all part of the same found family, and together, we're greater than the sum of our parts, to quote the Vulcan Book of Logic.
So I wanted to kind of address, I guess, the because you're pretty active online on Twitter for equal pay and I guess equal respect for people that are writing for animation shows and people that are writing for live action shows. And as naive as I am, before I saw you and following you others tweet about that, I didn't even like it would never occur to me that people would be paid less because they're writing for animation. Like it's so far-fetched a concept to me that
Yeah.
it didn't even occur to me. So do you
It's
want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean it's a long, complicated history of why that is, and the short answer is back in the 50s, when the Writers Guild formed and the Directors Guild formed and the Producers Guild formed, there were some union busting practices in the animation field. So it basically prevented the Animation Guild from forming until much later. And as such, every animated movie you've watched over the years that profoundly changed your life were all non-union. And it's not been until the last 20 years or so that animation writing, as a medium, has really kind of come into its own. As I think in the 70s and 80s, it would just be the storyboard artists just kind of like making it up as they went. Um, and it was only when stories started to become more complex and treated more like live action stories that they started hiring writers' rooms, and obviously there's a few exceptions to that rule. Like in the 70s, for instance, for the Star Trek show, they did have like DC Fontana. Am I saying that right? Yeah, DC Fontana, I think, was the head writer on that. Um, and they did freelance scripts and stuff, but just that sort of like backing into animation, having writers' rooms and scripts and stuff, basically meant that they were covered in a different way from WGA. Like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but then due to basically the way that union laws are broken up, basically meant that all the gains that the WGA had made to try to just make a fair and living wage and not go broke between shows, did not apply to the animation wing of it because they were under a different guild,
God
and
damn.
the other guild had far less power. It's sort of weird to think about. Just maybe 15 years ago, we weren't even called writers in the contract. We were called story people, which doesn't. So
God damn.
yeah. So it. The short answer is basically
There
because
is a look down also. I feel like there's kind of like a condescending look down. Like even from a fan perspective, a lot of people are like, "Oh, there's a new Star Trek." Yeah, but it's animated. It's like, please don't dismiss these shows based on the fact they're animated, or even just like even if it's like a kids show. Like I'm not talking Prodigy. I'm talking like even if like Nickelodeon or Nick Jr. they're putting out a kids show, please don't kind of like disregard it just because it's made for kids. There is still as much artistry and creativity going into it.
yeah, and I mean, there I've certainly encountered that before. And what's ironic is that seems to be like a distinctly sort of American attitude, strangely enough.
Yeah.
As much as America has contributed to the art form of animation, if you go to Japan, for instance, they've been making adult cartoons there for almost as long as animation has existed, and so it's a totally different vibe there. And even in Europe, for instance, like they see it for what it is, and they don't make a distinction of like animation is a certain type of story, and live action is for adults. Like they don't, it's all kind of part and parcel of the same thing. But that's neither here nor there. I think that attitude is changing a little bit over time. As far as some of the dismissiveness too, I think within the industry, I think there's this kind of weird sort of cart before the horse effect, therefore the cause kind of thing, where because animation can be paid less, that means therefore it is a lesser form, which is not true. I think it's just that and it's not to say you can't get paid well. It's just there's no safety net currently that allows animators to make a decent living if they are paid the bare minimum. And that's mainly what I think this movement is trying to do, is just raise that safety net to where they're paid a living wage, especially considering how much money and financial well-being animation brings to film and television. Especially during the pandemic, all the studios were carried on animation. And, if you look at you can literally look up a Wikipedia page of like the most successful franchises of all time, like live action or animated. And I think of the top 10, something crazy like 7 or 8 are animation.
Oh yeah.
And they all make like 30, 40, 50 billion dollars over the course of their lifetime. And
then of course you have things like Star Wars, which I mean predominantly you would consider a live action kind of franchise, but they have how many, like what, 6 animated shows that carried this franchise for so long, after, like, in between the prequels and the sequels coming out,
and is now informing the shows.
And now they're bringing in these characters that have been in all of these animated shows.
Yeah. So and that's just on the writing side. I think the same issue has happened across all departments in animation, where that for better for worse, the contracts has stayed more or less the same in this sort of artificially low level, and has barely changed. And now it's to the point where even the people like in the editors or the storyboard artists or the art designers or timers, they can't make a living either at the current levels. And so we're sort of like trying to just finally, and it's been something that I think it's the only way it changes is if the people in the guild organize and basically do, dig their heels in and say, we can't just keep kicking this can down the road, especially in this day and age. And that's what there's
no way of folding like the animating, I guess the animators guild, there's no way of folding that into like the various other guilds, like you guys animated writers, there's no way of just folding that into the writers guild, and then it's all the same thing.
Intensely boring, complicated process.
I would assume it is.
The short answer is no. But it gets even more confusing because
laws say you can't, right?
Among other things, yes. But it gets even more confusing because when you create a show, right? Because it's a brand new show, and most networks aren't necessarily beholden to one guild or the other. You can actually, in theory, like on Netflix, for instance, they have shows that are WGA animated, and they have shows that are Animation Guild animated. So like it could be either. And obviously it'd be nice if it was WGA, just because of the benefits are better. But the studios will usually opt for Animation Guild because it's cheaper. And usually will only allow it for adult animation, like sort of Family Guy and that sort of thing, because of a precedent set randomly by The Simpsons 20 plus or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just like there's all these just weird kind of Byzantine rules that don't actually make a lot of sense. And that's, again, partially why this New Deal for animation exists, is to try to just like, hey, can we all just take a step back and try to rectify this very weird situation we've somehow found ourselves in?
Do we have a statistical average we could tell people? Like, is there like a numerical, or maybe like a percentage thing? Like how low animator writers paid compared to, like, I guess, live action writers? Is there a statistic we can?
Yeah, if you look up pay animation writers hashtag or the New Deal for animation hashtag, we have charts and graphs that will show you exactly what it is, but it's a considerable double-digit percentage amount. I don't want to say the exact number because I might get it wrong,
Okay.
but I want to say it's in the vicinity of 15 to 30%, depending on whether it's a network show or something.
I mean, at least people can go and now look it up and try and learn about that, maybe join the movement.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it really sucks, especially considering nowadays, like it would be hard to really tell a difference. Like if you didn't have visuals and you were just looking at script, it's pretty hard to distinguish like animated from live action shows, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is like they're the exact same. Like I have a script right now. This is a script for season 2 of Star Trek.
Oh,
and it looks exactly the same as a normal script. But I don't know, man. It's just a weird situation that we're trying to fix, and hopefully we can fix it finally.
Well, if something good happens from this pandemic, hopefully it's that it'll make studios and the powers that be realize that animation is something that is, as you say, carrying and helping these studios through these tough times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it'll give you guys a bit of a leg up there.
Yeah, and I think our union has been doing a great job sort of representing the issue of the Animation Guild members as they negotiate these. So I can't really talk about the negotiations because I don't know what's going on, but I'm hoping something good comes out of it.
Okay, well, fingers crossed. All right, I guess I've got a few more questions if you have time, but then we could leave it be. Small things and big things, but I don't know if you can answer the big things. I was wondering, first of all, because people have been talking about a feature film, like an animated feature film for Star Trek, and people have been pointing to Prodigy because it seems like the most, I guess, obvious idea. You guys, I assume everyone's like, yay for that, but that's not a thing that's been set in stone yet, or no one's actually talking about.
I can't really talk about it one way or the other. I have to confirm Northern I just legally can't talk about it.
But you would enjoy, and would you be part of that writing team if that would have happened?
I would enjoy it, and I would love to be. I'll put it that way.
That makes sense. I think that would be great. And also, would you guys be down to like creating a kind of crossover? Because when Lower Decks was coming out, I was like, I want a Lower Decks crossover episode with the animated series that blend both animation styles. And now I would love to see a Lower Decks and Prodigy crossover with like the two animation styles blended together. I don't know how realistic that is, like from an animation point of view. It might be a bit complicated, but
I think that's probably the biggest hurdle is which style do you do it in at that point?
We'll do it both. I think you have like a Prodigy, do the Prodigy backgrounds and everything, but you can have like and then the Prodigy characters are as they are. It's just like you integrate the 2D Lower Decks characters into that environment.
Yeah. So I will say this, stuff, we are on the phone and email and stuff with the Lower Decks guys constantly, just because our shows are pretty close together, just to make sure that they inform each other and one isn't stepping on the toes of the other. And there are some characters that we've talked about that we both might want to use at different times, and just making sure that they correspond. I'll put it that way.
This better be Barclay. You guys better be putting Barclay in all of these shows. Barclay better be a goddamn captain by Lower Decks.
But no, I think
it's cool that you guys are keeping informed. Like, is this? I mean, you guys are obviously keeping more informed with Lower Decks because you're closer within the timeline, and you guys are sharing like the animated kind of format, I guess. Yeah. But it's nice to know that all of these different teams, because you're off doing your own different things, right? But it's nice to know that you're all kind of informing each other and keeping each other aware of what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, we all, I think when we were all first starting, it was a little bit more sort of chaotic because on a TV show production, it's always like you're just trying to get your own show made. And but I would say now we've got it pretty well down to a pretty well-oiled machine to a certain degree, where everybody shares scripts with everybody now at various stages of production. We, whenever we have a question, there's those open lines of dialogue. We're talking, we're talking with the lower decks people, we're talking with the Prodigy people, we're talking with the Discovery people, of anything that might sort of correspond between the shows.
Well, you can't have like a huge event or something happen in, say, Picard or Lower Decks, and then like you guys, it just doesn't affect you at all, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we're at present, we're in an interesting sweet spot in that if you look at the Wikipedia page or the Memory Alpha page for 2384, like nothing happens, like it's completely blank. So, but you're absolutely right that like 2385 onward, there is stuff that happens, and 2380 and 2381, there's stuff that happens, and 2379. So like we can't ignore that. So we always just try to say like, okay, if there is this character in this time frame, how would it correspond to in your time frame, or if we want to introduce this concept, this science fiction concept, is it going to step on your toes, or can it actually inform that, right? And say like, oh, this is the progenitor of that technology years later.
The synth band being, I think, the biggest thing at the moment, which is quite interesting within the Star Trek universe. But the synth band did not affect holograms, clearly.
Yeah, it's just synthetic. I mean, it's an interesting distinction they make, isn't it? But yeah, it's just synthetic beings and bodies with like positronic brains and such. But even then, that doesn't happen until at least sometime after Utopia Planitia.
It was 2380, 2399 or
2385. I think within a year or so of, if you look at the chronology of it, it's the Utopia Planitia happens. They basically cease all A500 stuff until they can figure out what went wrong, and then in the ensuing months or what have you, a series of events happen where Picard tries to propose a new one without the sense, but it would be too great of a drain on the other resources. He threatens to resign. They accept his resignation because it would mean if they went forward with this plan, a bunch of member worlds would resign. The synth ban happens at some point in there. That in turn jeopardizes Thaddeus Riker's life. There's a lot of sort of events, that a chain of events that I don't think they've specifically said it happens.
But then there are smaller things like Riker and Thaddeus Riker and all. That's very important for us as fans, but I don't think that that's small scale when it comes to like the universe itself. So that has no true impact on you guys or Lower Decks.
But the bigger thing, but you're right, there are bigger things at play, like Utopia Planitia, the synth ban, the Romulan evacuation. There's a lot.
Spock's disappearance.
Spock's disappearance. Yeah. Although I will say 2387 is still kind of a long ways off for any Star Trek show. I think usually in Star Trek, they don't go more than a year.
Well, it's a long ways off for you guys in the future, but also in the past, because you guys are also telling us that you guys have some of this show is taking place in like 50 years in the future, or maybe not some of the show, but I'll avoid the diviners from 50 years in the future.
Right. Or at least like sort of an alternate future that they came from, that he's trying to create.
Yes. Alternate futures. How perfect a transition. First of all, I do want to say that I do think you guys were a bit harsh with the diviner as it stands. I don't know if you guys are going to get him back. I know he was very mean and very bad, but I felt very, very sad for him because now he's crazy and they left him to like starve and die on a planet alone. Well, in his sadness, and I feel
I will say they did not leave him to starve and die.
Oh, they didn't.
First of all, no, because as you saw before, the Rev 1 has left the planet before, and the facilities were still there with enough food and water and resources to feed the whole a planet of hundreds of miners.
Okay, so he'll be fine. Months.
Yeah, he has.
He'll just live out the rest of his days, I guess, in solitude, in solitary confinement.
Yeah, he's on the planet in the mining facility that he was already living on, and that he created and had been living on.
Okay, so I feel a little less sad about that. That's good.
So yeah, for the record, they did not leave him to starve and die.
Good. Well, that feels more Starfleet. That didn't feel very Starfleet.
No, if anything, it's pretty close to what Kirk did with Khan in Space Seed.
Yes.
Which,
Yeah.
of course, that didn't work out well, but
Well, I'm assuming Robot Man's gonna go and pick him up at some point or something. Because
yeah.
you guys want us to believe that robot's dead. Come on, I don't believe that.
Well, we've already shown that you know, it's more of a sort of a robotic shell that
Yeah, exactly. Because he can transfer his
yeah,
consciousness over here and over there.
yeah.
Alternate realities. You guys used the badge from the alternate timelines because TNG and Voyager have shown us this alternate badge. And
Yes.
so I guess fans over the years have kind of assumed that that is what the badge would become. But I think it's more because they had that badge lying around. So if they were doing an alternate timeline, then why not just reuse the prop that they already had? But you guys have kind of confirmed that badge as being now like the badge of the future.
Yeah, well, they're rolling it out at this point in time.
Okay.
Because there's a couple of points to this particular thing, and I can get really in the weeds with it if you want, or I could just do sort of Cliff's Notes version.
Oh, that's fine. Whatever, whichever you want.
Okay. So you're absolutely right. Is that, you know, in Deep Space Nine, TNG, and Voyager, whenever they cut to a flash forward of like sort of the late 2380s, 2390s, and even 2404, they showed that alternate future comm badge with the two bars and then the sort of hollow delta, right?
Yeah.
But then what was interesting is it seemed like those alternate futures kept shifting a little bit every time some timey-wimey time travel, because you only ever saw it in those time travel episodes,
yes,
usually. So it seems like that timeline kept shifting always a little bit. And then I think when Picard came out, a lot of people were like, like it opened up this question of like, as you said, people kind of assumed that was going to be the future comm badge, but instead they saw one that looked like that was like the version that came after that one. Like it was a little bit sleeker. It was, you know, a slightly different coloring. And so a lot of people were wondering like, well, if every one of these other alternate futures, you know, someone in Starfleet kept designing this particular comm badge, it means that it was almost inevitable, right? So the question is like, what changed? Why is that comm badge, you know, that 2404 Janeway was seen wearing, not seen in 2399? And I think the short answer is when 2404 Janeway traveled back in time and brought that comm badge into the Prime Canon timeline in 2378 and helped Voyager arrive home 16 years early with all of this game-changing faster than light technology and data on Borg transwarp hubs and coaxial warp drive and quantum slipstream. Like when you have an organization that is fundamentally built on exploration, if you give them a bunch of stuff like, here's how you can explore faster, you know, like it's going to change the organization and speed up the timeline a little bit. So that was the idea, is like, you know, had Janeway not gone back in time and caused Voyager to arrive, you know, 14,
it would have inevitably become the comm badge.
It would have become the comm badge maybe in the mid or I think we saw it as early as 2390 or 2389. But because it came back early, it shifted the timeline. So the development of that comm badge happened a little earlier in the timeline. So at this point, it's a little experimental, right? They're slowly rolling it out, but you still have the old school 2370s comm badge, you know, old reliable out in the beta quadrant and a few other places. Like why break it if it ain't, why change it if it ain't broke, kind of a thing. Especially, you know, given that we know that Federation resources are thin, it doesn't make sense they would just destroy all these working comm badges. And we've seen different variants of comm badges in every iteration of Star Trek. On Deep Space Nine, they had Bajoran militia comm badges. They had regular. On TNG, they had Wesley's silver provisional comm badge. They had the regular comm badge. They had a black rimmed comm badge. So like it's all over. Like there's always been sort of like experimentation with designs and uniforms and comm badges and stuff. So yeah, that like so the short answer, the not in the weeds version is like this is the start of like we're starting to see this experimental com badge rolling out, and will probably become the dominant one by the late 2380s as the old one phases out.
Until the Picard com badge comes in.
It will be in use until the Picard com badge, which evolved from it in the mid to late 2390s.
So you guys thought like this is a decision of you or someone else that wanted to really like integrate this, I guess, fan favorite com badge into the show? Because you guys could have very well stuck with like just having one com badge.
I think it was,
you didn't have to add the variant.
I think it was a decision early on. We were like, well, we're pushing into the mid to late 2380s, and we're running out of time to showcase the com badge. And it feels like, just given how many times the com badges and quickly the com badge has changed in like the 2360s and the 70s, it seems a little surprising to suddenly just hang on to like the old com badge for 20 extra 20 years.
Okay, so yeah,
and never see the com badge.
Starfleet has a precedent of changing the com badges all the time. Let's do it once more.
Well, it makes sense. They're a scientific enterprise. Like that. Like look at how often we get new iPhones. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like these are experimental com badges that probably have better range or easier to lock onto and whatnot.
I'm assuming they all have one particular like system inside of them that can't be like replicated or broken down with like the meta recycler, whatever it is. So they have to physically build them, or someone has to be out there.
There's I think there are components there that maybe aren't easily replicated. Yeah.
That would explain why you couldn't just like apply these com badges fleet-wide, send the recipe over the holodeck and over the the replicator, and then just.
Well, that's why we have engineers, right? It's like somebody has to put this stuff together and keep it running.
Exactly.
So yeah, this is this is gonna be phasing in over the through the late 2380s and will become the dominant com badge for a time before we see the Picard com badge. So we finally fulfilled the promise of the Berman.
Yeah, era. You guys made it happen. We've been seeing it for so long in so many shows, and finally we're actually getting it.
I know. Well, I have. I swear I had. Oh,
no, he's got goodies and merch. We gotta.
Yeah, I have it right here. So.
Oh, there we go. Well, you're not responsible for merch. Neither is anyone on your team, I guess. Like no one, Hageman, no one writing, no one. It's all in the hands of, I guess, Viacom CBS or Paramount now.
Yeah, well, there's a whole division in a company, especially a company that large. It's consumer products.
You need to start sending them emails and telling them to start, making more Prodigy merch.
We bug them a lot. But it's
Holodec's got a goddamn plate. Right?
What I will say is it is coming. Don't worry. It's way above my pay grade, and they're very good at what they do. But I think part of it comes down to, they can't always launch right away because they need to build, in order for the metrics of sales to make sense, they need to build enough of an audience so that if they physically make the stuff and put it on the shelves, there'll be enough people out there aware of the show that will buy it. I think that's mainly the reason.
That makes sense.
But as a fan, I'm like, give it to me yesterday, because I want it all. I want my walls.
Well, they could have launched the show with like Murph plush toys. Like that would have sold immediately.
I mean, yes, I agree. But I didn't go to business school, so I don't know how it works.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. If you have, do you have like any final things that you wanted to talk about, maybe, or?
I guess my one thought is like, first of all, I appreciate you, saying such kind things about the show. It's always a pleasure to just, when I'm scrolling on Twitter and I see your brief thoughts, and you're very good at like holding back what you actually think about the show. I'm like waiting with bated breath. It's like, oh my God, is Toddy on the Tomb going to like it? And then you're like, I liked it. And then I'm like, yes, we got him. But I also want to say, thank you to the fans. The reception to the show, especially now that we have sort of our first mid-season chunk out there in the world, has been really overwhelmingly positive. And that can be a hard thing to do with a new Star Trek show. So
Oh
I
yeah.
really appreciate the fans doing that. And I can't wait for you to see what comes next. Like as I've mentioned before, like we are trying to find what this new version of Starfleet looks like, pushing into the 2380s and 90s, and finding that balance between old and new, and finding exciting, fun new experimental sort of technology and brave new horizons to explore. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you see that we're at least going for the spirit of Star Trek.
Oh, I don't think
And
anyone can deny that.
and I promise you, like, as we have 40 episodes right now that we're working on, that we've planned across. So, which is sort of a rarity, right? That's almost like a return to form of old school Star Trek, where each
Well, I was gonna
season,
say you guys now have 20 episodes per season.
yes,
That's like because you guys flipped format in between production there.
yeah, I
But
mean,
you guys are almost old school Star Trek.
yeah, we always kind of broke, like with any story that's that long, you always incrementally kind of wind up breaking it into like sort of peaks and valleys anyway, which is why right at episode 10 there is a mid-season finale that feels like, okay, this is an exciting conclusion to some stories, but obviously a lot still to come. And
What prompted the decision to not make it the finale, like not make it just a 10 episode season?
um I don't know.
Oh,
I
okay.
do.
So this is maybe like a studio decision.
Well, I mean, that's what I was saying, is like we always kind of we always planned these first 20 as a whole,
Oh,
but we
okay.
also planned a midpoint, in order to make it, because if it's just like this is getting into the meta of storytelling, but if a story is just like up the whole time, it gets boring. If it's like all
I agree.
success, if it's all
Barney
failures,
Stinson was wrong with his mixtapes and How I Met Your Mother. It can't be all high. There has to be highs and lows, right?
yeah. So it's just but we were very conscientious about that, of like, okay, what is the midpoint, mid-season finale? What's our little 5 episode increments? What do those mean for our characters, just in terms of tracking character arcs and storylines? And that's something we learned from Tales of Arcadia, is like, regardless of what your seasons look like, you need to make sure that each even movement has a purpose and a forward direction for your characters.
Mm.
And it feels natural just to kind of break it into those sort of equal chunks. But no, the first 20 are very much of a unit. The next 20 are very much of a unit, but even holistically, there are things that are dealt with in the first 20, and there's things that are set up in the first 20 that pay off and drive the second 20. And I would say, more than anything, these first 40 are one sort of cohesive story.
Okay.
But yeah, so I hope people enjoy that. As a lot of people have noticed, these episodes go by very quickly. So I think you'll appreciate that we're taking our time with some of this stuff, rather than trying to cram it all into like 2 episodes and then it doesn't have any emotional impact for the characters of the audience. And then,
No, well,
yeah,
there was a difficulty to putting out like a 23-minute episode, I guess. There was difficulty in that, it's a very short amount of time. I guess it costs a lot of dollars to animate 23 minutes. But
yeah,
yeah, you guys don't have as much time as like a 50-minute, show to say what it is that you want to say.
yeah. So there's elements that I think we,
You break up over multiple episodes now.
yeah, break up over multiple episodes, over arcs, characters, even plot elements that were like, if we tried to cram this into the last 5 episodes, it would not be satisfying. Let's give it the chance to live and breathe over the course of another, storytelling unit of 10 episodes or
Well, I
20.
find you guys are balancing the serialized versus episodic aspect quite well. I mean, we've only had 10 episodes at the moment, but I feel like you guys have handled that pretty well at the moment.
Yeah, and if you like that, that's very much the format that we invented for Tales of Arcadia as well.
Mm.
We had an overall arching arc, but we also tried to take very specific care to make sure each episode had its own identity and was
Yeah.
about something, and hopefully was having sort of like a fun idea of the week that our characters were dealing with. So, and that's
Absolutely.
something we very much transferred over to Star Trek Prodigy. So, thank you everybody for watching. I hope you'll enjoy where we go with the show, and I can't wait for you to see what comes next. And yeah, if you want to stay up to date on stuff, I encourage you to follow the production crew. Uh, the Hageman brothers, Benny Bond, myself at Good Aaron on Twitter and Instagram and such. And yeah,
Your online life has now blown up, right? Since being part of a Star Trek production.
well, I already had a fan base with the Tales of Arcadia
Okay.
but now I would say it's certainly grown. That's for sure.
Well, I'm happy for you guys that, and I don't mean to throw shit at Discovery here, but I'm happy that you guys have come out later on, because Discovery kind of took like the big wave of hate, I guess. But now that big trend is, I think for the most part, I think it's kind of dying off. People have come to accept that you can't enjoy all Star Trek, or maybe you just won't enjoy all of the Star Trek that comes out, or all of the content that comes out in one single franchise. And so I think that this has enabled the newer shows, you guys, Lower Decks, to find an audience that is actually looking for or ready to appreciate like the varying Star Treks that you can get. So I think that's really good for you guys, because if you guys, or even Lower Decks or anyone, had come out like when Discovery came out, you know, like right in the beginning, that would have been a tougher journey, I think, because there was just so many pitchforks at that point, you know?
Well, yeah, but I think that there's always going to be a reaction to.
Oh, that's for sure. New
like
Star Trek will always ignite something.
Yeah, I was around long enough when people said that Deep Space Nine was an abomination and the worst thing to ever happen to Star Trek. And now
it's praised as the best.
I consistently see it praised as the best Star Trek ever made. So you know, not obviously some people differ in that opinion, but that's not an uncontroversial opinion anymore to say that Deep Space Nine is the best. So you know, it's always a tricky thing with a franchise that means so much to so many people, which again is why I'm so grateful that people once they kind of realize what we were doing with our show, what the setups and payoffs were with the characters, that they've embraced it so thoroughly. So thank you, everybody.
No, seriously, you guys are doing a good job. And even in so we've talked a lot about like character arcs and the development and the time spent on characters, but even in like just the sci-fi concepts, like going on this planet that's like engulfing people with its vines and what have you, like I talk about it in depth with my episode reviews, which I'm gonna sadly have to stop because you guys are pumping out so much Star Trek now. But yeah, no, even the sci-fi concepts are very well executed in this show. So I think I can speak for most of the fandom here when I say that you guys are making a good show, and we're very, very anxious to see what happens next. We're very excited.
Well, thank you so much. You know, and as I said before, like, you know, just if there's anything where you're not sure, like you're wondering like where are they going with that, just wait and see. We have plans. Oh, we have such plans.
I hope you guys don't screw my timeline up too much, because you know we put in some work in making this timeline every year, and hopefully you guys aren't gonna miss it.
Right.
Too many lines is too complicated, yo.
Well, I just remembered, like, we've already seen in parallels, there's plenty of quantum universe.
There's plenty. I don't add them. I only add them if we have like a major timeline, like the Kelvin timeline is a major thing, the mirror universe. As long as you guys don't go out of your way to create like a new complete timeline, it'll be fine. I can handle that.
There's the prime universe will come out of this more or less intact. I'll put it that way.
Okay. All right. Oof. I don't know if that's reassuring or not.
It'll seem like it's not, but you'll see that it is.
Okay.
I don't know how else to say it without spoilers.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. My audience isn't that big, although maybe a little more people than usual might tune in for this. I don't know how many interviews you've done yet for like Prodigy, if you've been talking to a lot of people.
I've talked a little bit to, you know,
Trek Core, isn't it? Yeah.
Trek Movie, and I think Trek Brasilia. I spoke with them a little bit. And,
okay.
You know, but it's just smatterings here or there.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching this. As usual, I will try to keep this as unedited as possible. I like to keep these discussions raw. There's not that much to cut out. We didn't get awkward anyway, so that's fine. Yeah. A big live long and prosper as usual, and I'll see you everyone next time. Thank you. All right, that's all of it. I hope you guys had a great time. Thank you so much for watching. As usual, do like, subscribe, share, tell everyone about this video, because maybe there's some nuggets of information that they will enjoy. A big shout out and a big thank you to all of my patrons. And as usual, live long and prosper. I can't do it with this hand. I don't. Live long and prosper, guys.